All right, so tonight I'm excited to announce that our speaker, Wendy S, is joining us from Glendale, and I'm really excited to hear her story. So Wendy, welcome. You are muted, Wendy. There you go.
Thanks, Tiffany. My name is Wendy Singer. I am a recovered alcoholic. And I want to thank Tiffany for asking me to speak. I was here watching how many people keep coming into this meeting, and the more people that keep coming in, the more nervous I keep getting. And I was already kind of nervous anyways. But it's always an honor to be asked to be of service, and I've never said no. And it's just too bad that it's not in person, because it would have been a great reason to have to go visit Prescott. I love it up there. And anyway, so my sobriety date is June 26, 1985. This past June, I celebrated 35 years sober. Came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've stayed. And it's been quite a journey. And I have a little while to talk, so I don't spend a lot of time on my drunk-a-log, and I feel that way because I think that most of us know how to drink. I'll qualify a little bit so that you know that I am an alcoholic. I'm not just saying that I am. I don't know why somebody would want to just say they are if they're not, but I do qualify to have my seat in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I say that because when I got into treatment, I was told that I didn't drink long enough to be an alcoholic, and I wasn't old enough to be an alcoholic. And those aren't qualifications that make me the alcoholic. So, you know, a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. And, you know, when I talk about what it was like, I just kind of sum it up and go, it was really bad. You know, things growing up, alcohol wasn't a problem for me. And, you know, there's a story in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that's called Freedom from Bondage. And it's my favorite story in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I related to it so much because she talked about the stuff that happened to her growing up and how she felt and the things that happened in her life. And alcohol wasn't a problem, but she was geared towards becoming an alcoholic because of the feelings and the emotions, and then, you know, taking on one man at a time. And then when she found alcohol, what alcohol did for her and the consequences that happened with it. And I totally related to that. So I always relate to that story the most. But, you know, there's a lot of my childhood I don't remember growing up. And I believe I blocked that out because it's been painful. It wasn't very pleasant. And then those things that happened as I was growing up aren't what made me an alcoholic, because I believe that people go through stuff and they don't end up drinking like I did. But, you know, I don't know how old I was when I first drank, but one of the things that happened that was significant for me growing up was I was about 9 years old, and my dad left. He just walked out one night, and he never came back home, and I didn't understand why. And so I had a lot of, you know, what I found out when I got sober, I had a lot of abandonment issues. And I didn't trust anybody because I was afraid if I let you in and I got too close to you, you were going to leave anyway. So I just kept you away, and there was nobody who was ever going to hurt me like he did again. And I kind of lived my life that way for a while, and then I blocked people out and I kept them at arm's bay. And, you know, and it worked good until I was probably, and I don't know how old I was when I had my first drink, but I know what happened. Well, I know what started to happen. Is, you know, my first drink I ever drank was a beer, and I don't remember what happened after that. I totally blacked out. You know, and I didn't know that I was a blackout drinker until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous and found out what blackout drinking was. There was gaps that happened when I drank that I couldn't remember what happened. And, you know, and I was pretty young. I wasn't even old enough to drive when I started drinking. And it created some consequences for me, and it created some issues for me. And but the first night that I drank that beer, the one thing that I remember feeling is when it went down, and it talks about it in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that when you get that phenomenon of craving and then it goes in, it just kind of like everything calms down and you feel good and everything's okay. and life was okay. Nothing was wrong in my life. And I woke up the next morning and I had no idea what happened the night before. And I don't know that I swore off that I would never do it again, but it set the course for me for my drinking. And what I did is I drank a lot of other stuff. I never drank beer after that one night, that one beer, and never drank it again since. But I went through a lot of other different types of alcohol, and I continued to drink through high school. And, at one point things got kind of crazy at home with my drinking, that I ended up going to live with my dad because whenever my mom wouldn't let me do what I wanted, I would always threaten her that if you don't let me do this, I'm going to go live with my dad. And so she always gave in. And one day in particular, it was my beginning of my junior year in high school, I said that to her, and she said to me, "Go." And I remember sitting there thinking, like, well, wait a minute, that's not what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say, okay, and give in, and this is the role that we play. And so I went, and what I found out later in Alcoholics Anonymous is that was my first geographic that I did. I went someplace else to escape what I was feeling and getting in trouble in California. And I went and lived in Kentucky. And, and what I hear in the rooms all the time, and it's been my experience, is that when I moved to Kentucky in the middle of wintertime, I found similar people that did what I did. And it became a problem there. And at some point, I ended up doing a geographic from Kentucky and going back to California, and kind of decided to try to get my life back together and finish high school. And so I did that, and my senior year in high school, there he was. And I had to have him. And, it's funny because now my sponsor calls men, because obviously I switched from alcohol to men, they're a drink with legs. And that's what this proved to be for me. And, and him and I got into this relationship because I had to have him. And I always tease because once I got him, I really didn't know what to do with him. We drank together. It wasn't good. I was a very friendly drunk. He was a very possessive, confrontational drunk. So we did not do well together, and it created a lot of havoc. And that relationship was off and on and up and down. And, and when people stay in abusive relationships, I know why they stay today, because I stayed in that relationship like that, because you know what? That's what I learned. That's what I watched my mom do. That was what I knew. And things didn't get so good. And we had broken up, and one thing led to another. And I finally severed the relationship, and 3 months later, I found out I was pregnant. And, in those first 3 months that I was pregnant, I was doing a lot of drinking and a lot of other stuff. And I keep my story, because this is an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and staying with the traditions, I keep my story in regards to alcohol, but there were other things that were involved. And I prayed that my son would not come out, at the time I didn't know it was my son, but I prayed that he wouldn't come out with something wrong with him because of everything that I had been doing to my body. And, when he was born, the father says, well, we have to get married. So we did. We got married, and I figured that the baby would fix everything. And it did for a while, but there was something that was going on inside me, and it talks about it in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. When you read Bill's story and you read the reasons why we drink, there was just something that was missing in my life, and I eventually started drinking again. And my son was young, and I started taking him with me, and this continued until he got too old where he could talk, and he'd start repeating things to his dad. So I couldn't take him anymore. And I say that because it's a significant turning point for me that happened. I was a married woman, and I wasn't acting like a married woman. And my husband, I didn't really want to be in the relationship, but I didn't know anything different, and I was afraid to get out. And I was so afraid of being alone that I stuck in that relationship and figured it was better than nothing. And he'd tell me that, if you drink today, I'm divorcing you. So I would drink that day and hoping that he would divorce me, and he wouldn't. And I'd come home the next night, the next morning, come to. It was a terrible way of living. And the people I were hanging out with started telling me that I had a problem. And before I got here, I never knew anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd never heard anything about alcoholically, never heard anything about having a problem with drinking, never knew any of this life or disease existed. But I just thought they were wimps and couldn't keep up. And what we do is we find the people who do what we do and can keep up with us, or eventually we walk away from them and we could kind of start drinking on our own. And for me, I remember some stuff that happened. I've lost a job from this disease. I've wrecked a car from this disease. And most significantly, my last day out there was June 25th, 1985. And that morning, I don't know, that morning I wanted to drink, and I hadn't taken a drink yet. And my mom, I didn't know it at the time. I found this out later. She kind of figured I might be having a problem with something. And I asked her if she could watch my son because I needed to go do something. And she asked me if I had been drinking. And I remember I was standing in front of a 7-Eleven, and at the time they had payphones on the walls outside 7-Eleven. And I was talking to her, and in one hand I had the phone, and in the other hand I had a drink. And when I started drinking, I was drinking really expensive wine, and when I finished my drinking, I was drinking Mad Dog 2020 and Boone's Farm. And I didn't like it, but it gave the effect that I needed. And I had a bottle in one hand and the phone in the other, and I told her that I had not been drinking because I hadn't taken a drink yet, but I needed to. And she said that she would watch my son. And I don't remember what story I gave her as to why I needed her to. But what was really significant for me was that morning I took my son to her house, and I watched him walk down this really long driveway. But I couldn't walk down there with him because I had already taken a drink of alcohol. I'd already been drinking. And I was crying because I didn't want to go do what I knew I was going to go do. I really didn't want to do it, but I had to. And so I watched my son walk down the driveway, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and I'm telling him to keep going to Grandma's, and I'm crying. And when he got around the corner, I left. I don't remember anything else that happened that day. But I'd been having an affair, and I knew that much. And I was at his house, and the next morning when I came to was June 26th of 1985. And for some reason, that morning was different than any other morning that I had come to. I looked in the mirror. I saw what I looked like. I was down to about 110 pounds, 105 pounds. I was emancipated. My eyes, I had dark circles under my eyes. And prior to that, I thought I looked really good. But that morning, when I looked in the mirror, what I saw was like the devil. I saw how thin I was. I saw how terrible my face looked. My eyes were tired. Something was really different. And I remember leaving and going to my mom's house that morning and saying, you know what? I can't do this anymore. And she says, well, it's funny because Tony, who was my husband at the time, and I are tired of your stuff. And we've called around, and there's a bed waiting for you. Now, my mom and my ex didn't get along very well. So my ex wanted me to wait till he got off work to take me, and didn't want my mom to take me. And I was sitting there, and it's 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know about you guys, but what always happened for me when I came to the next morning, oh my God, I'm never going to do that again. Feel terrible, and then you start to feel a little bit better. Then you start to get a little shaky, and then you have to go do it because you got to get rid of the shakes. Well, the shakes started coming on, and I remember looking at my mom and telling her, I said, if I don't go now, I'm not going to go. So she took me to a treatment center in Pasadena, California, and I walked in that morning, and now it's about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and I'm irritable, I'm tired, I've been on a run for 3 days. I wanted to drink, but I didn't want to drink. And I remember walking through these doors, and the doors closed, and I was a little nervous because I wasn't sure what I was getting into. And we sat there and we talked, and they asked me some questions, and I always laugh because I always say, I don't know what they asked me, but I must have answered them right because they let me stay. And it might have been the 20 questions to find out if you're an alcoholic. I might have answered those ones. I don't know what I answered, but I got to stay. And in that treatment facility, you know, I was educated about what Alcoholics Anonymous is, and I was educated on what alcoholism is. You know, and I was so glad to find out finally what was wrong with me, because I knew that something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. I didn't know why I felt different than the people that in school and the people around where I lived and stuff, and the kids. And, you know, we moved around a lot, so I never really got to know anybody. And I always felt different. And when I walked into this treatment center and they talked about this being a disease, I was so grateful and so relieved to know that this is what was wrong with me. And then it also gave me hope to think that maybe I can get better. And, you know, and they told me it was a family disease. And it's funny because my mom came to visit me at some point, and my dad had passed at this point, and my aunt came on my dad's side. And when I told them it was a family disease, they, both sides of the family go, well, you didn't get it from my side of the family. You didn't get it from my side of the family. And at that point, I made a decision. It didn't really matter what side of the family I got it from. It just mattered that I had it. I believed I had it, and I was okay with that. And so I pretended to proceed in this program, and I got to go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and I got to do a lot of classes and counseling and learn about this disease. And during this process, I think after the first week or two, because they didn't let me have visitors the first week, my husband came to visit me, and I was loaded with so much guilt that I sat down and I basically did a fifth step with him. I told him everything that I had done. And, you know, we talk about the steps being in order for a reason, and that we also don't make amends to somebody else if it's going to harm them. I created a lot of harm and havoc to that man. He did not need to know all of the details of everything that I relayed to him, but I was so loaded with guilt, and my intentions were good, but they weren't right. And when I explained to him everything that I had been doing, he proceeded to chase me around the grounds. And he pinned me down. Security took him off of me, and they banned him from coming. And he was not allowed to come visit me. And, you know, and during this process, I'm learning about the disease of alcoholism and the recovery process. And, you know, and they do it a little bit different in the treatment centers. But we had meetings, and people would come in. And I got to learn a lot about who I was and what I was and why I did what I did. And it started to all make sense. And then this guy tells me that I wasn't old enough to be an alcoholic. I was 25 years old when I got sober. He said, you're not old enough to be an alcoholic, and you didn't drink long enough to be an alcoholic. You know, and what somebody told me years later is they said, you should have told him if he didn't spill so much, maybe he would have gotten here sooner too. You know, I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I haven't found it necessary to leave the room since I walked in. And, you know, they told me that if I went back to, so I do the treatment center, it's a 4-week program, and I'm going through it, you know, and every week there's somebody graduating, and they graduate, some of them they recommend they go to a halfway house, some of them they recommend they go to this treatment center, this additional treatment center. And it came to the end of my 4 weeks, and I was getting near it. And prior to that, they had told me that if I went back home to my husband, that I would drink again. Because there was a lot of issues that were going on in that relationship that came to fruit when I was in treatment. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, where do I go? I'm 25 years old. I have a 4-year-old son at home. I'm a married woman. I have no job.
Go see Danny.
I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And I'm like, no, don't recommend one of those treatment centers to me. And they did. And so there was a couple, I had 2 choices. One was a 9-month program with guys and girls. And another one was a 3-month program with 25 women in a 5-bedroom house. Now, I was really torn of which one to go to. I liked the one with the guys, but I didn't like the 9 months. I wished it was a co-ed one for 3 months, but they didn't have one. And so I went and I interviewed, and I went to the one for the 3-month one with the women. And I'm not sure why I picked that one, but I did. And I think I picked it because it was only 3 months long and they didn't have any beds available. And they told me that if I wanted to get in there, that I would have to call every day. And I'm like, well, can't you just call me when you have a bed available? And they're like, no. If you want this, you got to be willing to go to any lengths, and you need to make the phone call every day so that we know you're willing to do the deal. Because there's a lot of people that want these beds, or there's a lot of people that need these beds, but the ones who want them will do the work. And so I called every day, and I was able to work something out with the treatment center that I stayed an additional 2 weeks until a bed opened up. And I went into that facility, the women's place, with 25 women in a 5-bedroom house. And I'll tell you what, I didn't like it. I hated it. I hated women when I got here. I couldn't relate to them. I didn't understand them. There was nobody to talk to. But you know what? I am so grateful because I believe that that treatment center for those with those women helped me really lay the foundation for what we talk about, the principles behind the steps in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, all 12 steps, each one has a principle behind it. And I believe that that women's home helped me learn those principles because there was a lot of cattiness going on. There was a lot of bickering. There was a lot of fighting. And all I wanted to do was stay sober because I was so afraid of drinking again and dying that I didn't want to die. And so I did what was suggested. I did everything they told me to do when I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. And eventually I was able to find a sponsor, and I eventually graduated from this halfway house into a transitional living center that they had in the back. And I spent another 9 months there. And as soon as I got out of this 90-day program, it was obvious to me that I needed to file for divorce. And, you know, they told me back then, you know, no major changes your first year in sobriety and no relationships your first year of sobriety. I don't know why they say that because it's not in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but that's what I was told. And I believed everything you told me when I got here because I was afraid not to. I filed for divorce because it was such a violent relationship, and I knew that I had nothing to offer, so I relinquished custody of my son and figured that I would get sober, get some time under my belt, get an apartment, get a job, get my act together, get into counseling, and then I would go back and fight for custody of my son. And so that's what I proceeded to do for the next couple of years. Because I got really involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got sober in California, Pasadena, California. I got really involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I found a sponsor. I worked the steps. I found a relationship with a power greater than myself. I completed all 12 steps. I got a service commitment, went to a lot of conventions and roundups. We went to the meeting early, did a meeting. They were an hour and a half in California, and then we'd do coffee after the meeting. And I did that every day, 7 days a week for my first year sober. And things started to get a little bit better. And then I started to feel a little bit better. And then I got my own apartment. And my whole goal was to get my son back. And so I proceeded to move towards that. You know, I think I was probably about 3 years sober when I decided to go back and fight for custody. And so I proceeded doing the footwork and the step work. You know, and I remember thinking I was doing pretty good. You know, and it's funny because I look back after a few years passed after that, I look back, I was a mess. I was a total mess at 3 years sober still, 4 years sober. And I didn't think I was that bad, but I was very emotional. Because see, what happened is for me is when you took the alcohol away, I'm stuck with all these feelings. And these feelings were very uncomfortable. I always say it's like having a deck of index cards, and I'm flipping through them, and every card has a different emotion on it, but it's flipping so fast that I can't find the feeling that I'm feeling to identify it, and they're just flashing by me so fast. And then I get really uncomfortable, and I don't like it, and I want to change what I'm feeling because I don't like feeling uncomfortable. I don't have alcohol to do that anymore. So unfortunately for me, you know, I found some other, and I call them X factors. You know, it could be It could be men, it could be shopping, it could be food, it could be working out, it could be anything else that I use for the same effect that I did alcohol. But see, what I figured is if I did any of those other things, at least I don't lose my sobriety. Well, the problem with that is I believe eventually they will lead me back to the drink, because they will lead me back to the woman that I used to be, and that woman will drink again. And I truly, truly believe that, and I still believe that after 35 years sober, that is a possibility. So I watch out for those X factors. And whenever I work with a new girl and I explain to her the X factors, they're always like, I don't know what that means. And we talk about it, and they get it. Because I can use anything alcoholically without picking up a drink at this point, but how long will it take before it takes me back to the drink? You know, I remember the day I was going into court to have the judge give us the decision of whether I was going to get custody back of my son or not. And I wondered if I would stay sober. And I was nervous, I was scared, and I remember sitting there thinking, you know what? I think I have been doing this with the whole goal of getting my son back. And I made a decision that day, and I made a deal with God or my higher power that no matter what, I was going to stay sober. No matter what. And I go in there, and I think that I believed that I really was going to get custody back. I did not get custody of my son. You know, in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about that. Sometimes we get our family back, sometimes we don't. I was one that did not get my family back. My son he was about 7 years old. And I did not have custody. And my ex made sure that my son knew everything that I had done. He made sure that the teachers knew everything I had done. He made it real challenging and real hard. And, you know, and I always look back now and go, you know, the great thing about my ex-husband was if he only knew how much he helped me become the woman that I became, he would have been so mad, because he tried to make it so hard and challenging for me and make my life so miserable. But what he really did is he made me become a better woman and a better person, because I did not lower myself to his level. And they told me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that one day your son will know the truth. And I wanted to know when. And they couldn't tell me when. And, you know, and so I proceeded to do this sobriety thing, and I made a commitment at that point, too, that I wasn't, no matter what, I was going to die sober. And that's still my goal today, is to die sober. You know, I've not found it necessary to pick up a drink for anything, and I've been through a lot of different stuff. You know, I lost custody of my son, and that was really hard and challenging. There was a lot of stuff that came up with that because his dad played a lot of games. And because of my program, I wasn't able to play those games because I wasn't willing to pay the consequences for it. When I got sober, they told me I can do anything I want in sobriety if I'm willing to pay the consequences. And sometimes I knew what the consequences were, and sometimes I didn't know what the consequences were. But I wasn't willing to take a lot of big risk because I was afraid if I went back out, I wouldn't make it back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I would die out there. And I didn't want to die. And so I proceeded to do what you guys told me to do. I got really involved, and I continued to do that. At 9 years sober, I was presented with an opportunity with a job for a promotion and a relocation from California to Phoenix. And I took it. And I got here, and the meetings were different. I was 9 years sober. I knew nobody here, and I got plugged right into a meeting and got involved in a home group and took a service commitment, and I got active and I got involved and I got in the middle of the herd. And, you know, what I was told a long time ago is people say they're in Alcoholics Anonymous or they're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's like telling somebody you're a football player, but you're sitting in the bleachers. You know, you tell everybody, yeah, I'm a football player, but when you go to the game, all you're doing is sitting in the bleachers. You're not on the field playing. Well, if I tell people I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous and I'm sitting in the bleachers, I'm not really a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have to be on the field playing. And so I choose to stay on the field in Alcoholics Anonymous and play on the field with the rest of the players who are playing down there. And, you know, when I got sober, they told me to look around because 1 out of every 2 of you are not going to stay sober. And I can tell you most of the people that I went actually most of the people that I know that I went through treatment with in that recovery home, none of them are sober. Some of them might have come back and got sober, but nobody stayed sober. And that scares me. You know, we say today in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I know that we mean well by it, but we tell people if you go back out, just come back. They didn't tell me that when I got sober. They told me if you don't know if you belong here, go back out and drink until you find out if you do. Try some controlled drinking. Try not drinking for a year. And when you know that you can't do that, then come back. Don't waste my time. And we tell people just come back. And, you know, and what I've seen happen over the years is that there's this illusion that if you go back out, you can come back in. And not everybody gets that choice to come back. I've watched people struggle with trying to get back. I've watched people who do eventually make it back, and I'm glad that they do. But I've also watched people not make it back and they die. I found it easier to stay. Relapse is not part of my story, so I don't know what that is like. But for the people who make it back, I'm so glad that they do, because I listen to what happens to them, and I don't want to feel that way. It was hard enough for me to get here and stay. I just find it easier to stay. So I moved to Phoenix at 9 years sober, not knowing anybody, and I was too afraid not to get involved. And so I plugged into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I got really involved in service work here. And I was still working with my sponsor in California, and they told me she used to work at the same company I did, so it was pretty easy to see her every month. And then one day she said she was leaving the company. I needed to find a sponsor here. And I'll tell you what, I had a hard time finding a woman who had what I wanted. And I finally found one, and I was going to ask her, and every time I'd go to the meeting, she wasn't there. And it took a little while for me to finally ask her. And and so I did. And, you know, she's been my sponsor since then. You know, I've walked through a lot of stuff in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, I've lost my mom. And I was able to be there and be a daughter for her and make some life-deciding decisions for her when it came towards the end. She died of lung cancer. I think that's the only time I've really been mad at God in my entire sobriety. You know, I'm kind of a half full glass kind of girl. And I look at it this way: everything's going to happen the way it's supposed to. But what the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous do is they give me the tools to be able to deal with whatever life throws at me. And I can walk through that stuff as a woman with dignity and grace. You know, and when I got here, they told me if you want to be treated like a woman, then you need to dress and act like one. And so I started doing that. And, you know, and today I can tell you that I am a woman of dignity and grace. You know, I walk into a room, I'm not ashamed of who I am today, and I'm not ashamed of what I'm doing, because I have a person that I report to, and it's not any of you guys, and it's not anybody in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's a power that's bigger than me. You know, and I always say I lay my head down on my pillow at night. That's the only person I have to report to. I have to make sure I'm good with him. So, you know, when I think about it that way, you know, I'm not perfect. I don't claim to be perfect. And when I go through the steps with the girls, sometimes what I do is I have little badges that I make up that says, I'm God. And I give it to them. And I tell them, you know, when you want to play that role, make sure you wear this tag, this name tag, so that we all know. And when you're done playing God, take it off. And then when you want to play God again, put it back on. And it's just a clear reminder that I am not in charge. You know, I get up every morning and turn my life and my will over to the care of a power bigger than me. So if I have to do that with my life, how can I manage somebody else's life? You know, and the other thing that I do when I work with women and we go through the steps is I give them a hula hoop. And we always go, what is the hula hoop? And the hula hoop is a reminder for me. It's an actual hula hoop, but I have a visual now of it. Everything within the hula hoop is my business. Everything outside the hula hoop is none of my business. And it's a clear reminder for me that whatever you're doing or whatever anybody else is doing is none of my business unless it directly affects me, and then I have an issue and I take it up with you. But, you know, I been through the steps several times, and I like to stay involved in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, when I did the steps with my sponsor, I went through them, and you know, I continued to grow. You know, I am not the person I was when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am not the person I was at 5 years sober, and I am not the person I was at 20 years sober or 25. You know, every day I continue to grow, and I continue to become different because I continue to grow. And in the same aspect, my idea of a power greater than me also continues to enlarge and grow. You know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that, and I always repeat that because I heard somebody say a long time ago, you know, you can't just say the big book, because if there's somebody new in the room, they don't know what the big book is. They're looking for a book that's big. You know, we have to explain what it is. So I always say the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it tells me in there that I have to enlarge my spiritual condition on a daily basis, because the spiritual malady will kick in. And it talks about that on the bedevilments on page 52. And it has nothing to do with alcohol unless I'm drinking. So I can get into that at any point in sobriety. You know, and then the other thing is there's 3 places in the big book that talk about willing to go to any lengths. And on page 58, it talks about, if you want what we have, are you willing to go to any length to get it? You know, when I work with women, that's the first thing I ask them, because that's what was asked of me. And then the second thing is on page 76, it says, are you willing to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol? And you think about, what does that really mean? Am I willing to go to any lengths to do that? Am I willing to call somebody when I'm uncomfortable? Am I willing to journal? Am I willing to pray? Am I willing to meditate? Am I willing to reach out to somebody? Am I willing to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol? And I can tell you that after all these years, I still am. And then on page 79, it talks about, are you willing to go to any length to find a spiritual experience? And that is what this is about for me today. It continues to be about a spiritual experience, because I have to enlarge my spiritual growth. And if I don't, then I become stagnant. You know, and then we talk about the steps. You know, steps 1, you know, I admitted my life was unmanageable and I was powerless over alcohol. I had no problem with that. Step 2, when I first got sober, I had a little bit of an issue with it because I didn't want anything to do with God. And they told me I could make it anything I wanted, and so I did. Step 3, turn my will and my life over to the care of a God as I understand him. Some things I was willing to do that with. Some things I wasn't quite so willing to do that with. I was told to go back to step 2. If I can't complete step 3, then I have to go back to the prior step to it, because the steps are in order for a reason. And if you've done the step properly, then you have no qualm about going to the next step. So I went back to step 2, found that relationship with a power greater than myself that I could call, I call her Rachel. And I was able to go ahead and do step 3, you know, and then because I was willing to do that, step 4 was easy. I hear people say, you know, I'm so freaked out about doing step 4. I could not wait to get my step 4 written out and then complete my step 5. I could not wait to do that, you know, and then find out my character defects. You know, when it got to identifying what those were, I knew what a lot of them were. I knew what I was doing, and I knew how I felt, and I didn't want to feel them, so I was willing to get rid of them. But that took me to the next step, you know, going back to making the amends. Well, can I get rid of them without doing the amends? No. And, you know, and the amends turned out to be really free. Some of them were easier to do, and some of them weren't so easy to do. You know, my ex-husband told me when we got divorced to leave him alone and never talk to him again. And so I never did my amends with him, because his wish was for me to leave him alone, and I have to honor that. It doesn't mean I didn't clear it up on my end of the street, on my side of the street. I had to look at my part in it and know what that was. You know, and then step 10, I continue to do on a daily basis. And, you know, it says in step 10, you know, at once we talk to somebody about it when we recognize that something has gone on. And I have to do that because sometimes I get a feeling that maybe I owe an amends for something that maybe I really don't owe an amends for. I'm just uncomfortable because it's a new behavior for me. So I have to bounce it off of somebody to find out, do I really owe an amends or do I not? You know, and step 11, you know, upon awakening and upon retiring, I reflect back and look at my day. You know, is there anything that's unresolved that needs to be taken care of? And no, I don't want to carry anything in, because if I know for me that if I continue to carry it over and over and over, that eventually what happens is it comes out sideways. You know, and in the book it talks about HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, and it's in the beginning of the story, where he goes to the bar and he's a salesman and he's hungry and he stops at the bar, and next thing you know, he's drinking a glass of milk and he's drinking alcohol. And that's where the HALT comes from. For me, I have to be careful with that, because I have this, and I always call her, I have this psycho bitch personality that comes out when I'm hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And she don't play well. She don't play well with others. She don't play well with me. And she creates chaos. She creates situations where I have to make amends. And I don't like making amends in sobriety. You know, when I got sober, it was easy to make amends because I had been drinking, and a lot of things happened as a result of the drinking. So it's easy to say that, but you know, when you've been sober for a long time and you don't do something very nice and you have to go back and make amends, I can't blame it on anything other than me. I'm the only person I can blame it on. And saying I'm hungry or I'm angry or I'm lonely or I'm tired is not a good enough reason to cause harm to somebody else. So on those days, what I've learned to do is sit on my hands and bite my tongue and stay away from other people. So when she comes out, you don't see me around, because she don't play well. And I don't want to have to make amends in sobriety. You know, and then when we get to step 12, you know, that's really the whole gist of this. It tells me in the big book that at one point or another, there's going to come a time where a drink is going to feel like it's the only solution. And the only thing between me and that drink is going to be my relationship with my power greater than myself. That's the only thing that's going to come between it. And I have had that experience. And then it tells me also that the one thing that will guarantee me sobriety is one alcoholic working with another. You know, so I go to meetings and I put my hand out and I work with women, and I have never turned anybody down when they've asked me to sponsor them, because, you know, it says in the responsibility prayer, when the hand of AA reaches out, I want the hand of AA to always be there. And for that, I am responsible. And I am responsible for that, because that's what was done for me when I walked into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Is they put their hand out for me no matter what I did. And I'll tell you what, I tested everybody in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got sober, there weren't a lot of women in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there wasn't a lot of women with any long-term sobriety. At that point, I think the one who had the most sobriety, she had a year, and she went back out. And there was a lot of older guys in the room, and they smoked, and I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to stay sober. We can stay sober through anything. I don't care what life brings at us. We can stay sober through anything. And I have found that. And, you know, I sometimes think about, why am I so lucky that I get to stay sober? Well, you know what? I still do today what I did when I walked in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sponsor. I still go to a lot of meetings. I call my sponsor. I journal. I have a relationship with the power greater than myself. You know, I've done numerous book studies, and we're actually doing one right now on Monday nights. And it's interesting because it's all by Zoom, so it's very different. But I'm taking another group of women through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we do it in extensive detail for the first 164 pages. You know, and I've done step studies, and I've done tradition studies, and I do a tradition study with one of my sponsees and her sponsees in Chicago. And we do it by Zoom. So there's some good things that have come out of Zoom meetings. You know, when anyone ever reaches out, I'm always there. And people call me, and they always tell me, and I'm always amazed by this. They go, Wendy, you answered your phone. You know, well, you called me. So, of course, if I don't answer it, I usually call you back. You know, and I get calls from Agua Fria Intergroup for 12-step calls, and they'll tell me that they've called all the numbers on there, they've called a group of numbers and nobody's answering and nobody's called back, and I pick up or I call right back, they know that I'll call them back. Because, you know, I think about what would happen if people weren't here for me when I got here. I wouldn't have the life I have today. And I have the life I have today because of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I was 17 years sober, and I had met a man. I'd been single for a long time, and I met a man and we got married 3 years later. And I was with him for 16 years. And, you know, and 3.5 years ago, life took a different course, and my world got turned upside down. And, you know, and I remember the night that he walked out, I was supposed to speak. It was a Thursday night, and I was supposed to speak that Sunday morning at a meeting. And one of the girls I sponsored had called me, and I was crying, and she goes, "Are you all right?" And you know what came out of my mouth, because this is what has happened with all my experiences that I've gone through in Alcoholics Anonymous, is I know I'm going to be okay. I just don't know when. And I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know I'm going to be okay. And you know what? And like anything else, it's been a process. And it's not an event. It's not a finale. There's not an ending to anything. Life is a process. And as long as I remember that, I'm on this journey where God's taking me, and I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm going to end up. But I'll tell you what, I love the journey. You know, and I stop and smell the flowers. I stop and notice the little things. I don't look at just the end picture. I'm looking at everything around me because I want to take in everything. I don't want to miss anything. You know, I always have this motto, I'll try anything once. Because when I got sober, they go, "What do you like, Wendy?" And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't know who I was. And so I came up with this motto that I'll try anything once, and then I got to try it twice just to be sure I don't like it. And so that's what I do. I'll try anything once, and then if I don't like it, I'll try it a second time just to be sure I don't like it. And at that point I don't like it, then I go, no, I don't like it. The only thing that has not applied to is I skydived. I did that once, and I have no desire to do it again. I'm good. You know, jumping out of a perfectly good airplane seems really abnormal. I don't know why anybody would want to do it. I still don't even know why I did it, but I did it. But I can tell you that once they peeled my fingers and pushed me out the door, and I'm floating, it was the most peaceful experience I've ever had. It was so quiet, and I was looking down on the earth, and at that moment, I knew that God had me. I was going to be okay. And that's kind of the way life has been in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm always amazed because I had a problem with alcohol that I've been given the life that I've got today. You know, I have a sister who does not drink. And we grew up in the same household, same circumstances, same life events happened to both of us for the most part. And we are nothing alike, nothing alike. And I always say, I wish she would start drinking. And people go, why do you want that? And I go, because if she would start drinking, she would have a reason to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and then she would be given so freely what I've been given in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a way of living. And I have tools that help me deal with stuff today, and I have a fellowship of people around me that I am lucky. I am so lucky, and you know what? Most of them are women today. They've been women for a long, long, long time. You know, I stayed away from the guys because I was afraid it would take me back out drinking. And today, most of the women in my life have kept me sober. They've helped carry me when I've needed to be carried. I've helped carry them when they've needed to be carried. And it baffles me that because I had a problem with alcohol, I've been given the life that I have today. You know, Alcoholics Anonymous, I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I will stay in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I will stay on the field. I will continue to be that player in the middle of the field because I don't want to be picked off on the outside. And, you know, I'm going to close with something that I always like to read, and it's on page 317. And it says, it's in the story of My Chance to Live. And it says, when I am willing to do the right thing, I am rewarded with an inner peace no amount of liquor could ever provide. When I am unwilling to do the right thing, I become restless, irritable, and discontent. It's always my choice. Through the 12 steps, I've been granted the gift of choice. I am no longer at the mercy of a disease that tells me the only answer is to drink. If willingness is the key to unlock the gates of hell, it is action that opens those doors so that we may walk freely among the living. And today I get to do that. So thank you, guys.